The Whispering Shadows. The forest had always been a place of serenity for Sarah and James. They had come to escape the noise of the city, but as they ventured deeper, the dense fog thickened and an unsettling silence took over. The birds that once chirped had vanished. Then, through the trees, Sarah spotted something. An old, crumbling house hidden within the forest's embrace. Covered in thick vines and moss, it seemed as though nature had been trying to reclaim it. James hesitated, feeling an unshakable chill, but Sarah, driven by curiosity, urged them forward. Pushing the creaky door open, the couple stepped inside. The air was damp, the smell of mold and decay overwhelming their senses. Every surface was covered in dust, as though no one had set foot inside for decades. The dim light from outside barely illuminated the interior, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. James shook his head, feeling the weight of an unseen presence around them. As they moved through the halls, the wood beneath their feet groaned as if the house itself was alive and aware of their intrusion. While Sarah explored the living room, James felt a sudden cold breeze sweep past him. He turned quickly, but nothing was there, just the stillness of the empty house. But the cold remained, biting at his skin, and then, faintly, he heard it. A whisper. Incomprehensible, but unmistakable. He looked at Sarah, who was oblivious to the sound. "Did you hear that?" he asked. She shook her head, distracted by an old framed photograph on the wall. It depicted a family standing in front of the house. Their expressions were blank, their eyes unnerving, as though they were hiding something. As the day wore on, the once faint whispers began to grow louder and more distinct. It wasn't just one voice, but many, all overlapping each other. Some seemed to be arguing, others crying. Sarah now heard them too, and a look of fear crossed her face. "We should leave," James insisted. But the moment he spoke, the front door slammed shut, shaking the walls of the house. The couple rushed toward it, but it wouldn't budge. The windows, too, were locked tight. "We're trapped," Sarah breathed, her heart pounding. In their search for a way out, they stumbled upon an old library. Shelves of dusty books lined the walls. One, in particular, caught James's eye. It was bound in cracked black leather, with a strange symbol on the cover. Opening it, they found pages filled with cryptic drawings, twisted figures, eerie landscapes, and strange symbols. As James flipped through, his fingers began to tingle as though the book itself was alive. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and the whispers were replaced with one distinct voice. "Get out." Before they could react, the shadows in the room began to move. Out of the corner of Sarah's eye, she saw a shape take form, a tall, gaunt figure, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It was watching them. The figure stood still for a moment before slowly beginning to move toward them, its movements jerky and unnatural. Sarah screamed as the creature's face came into view, a hollow, twisted visage with no mouth, only eyes that gleamed with malice. James grabbed her arm, pulling her back as the figure lunged. They ran, but no matter where they turned, the figure seemed to be one step behind. Every door they tried was either locked or led them back to the same place. The house was shifting around them, changing as though it were a living maze. In the kitchen, they found the walls scrawled with words. "They are watching. They are coming." Sarah trembled, feeling a chill run down her spine. Who's coming?" As if in answer, they heard the soft sound of footsteps, not from one person, but from many, coming from the upper floors of the house, slow, deliberate, getting closer. The couple rushed upstairs, searching for an escape. Instead, they found a young woman's ghostly figure standing at the end of the hall. Unlike the creature that pursued them, she didn't seem malevolent. Her translucent form flickered in and out of sight. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "They'll take you, like they took us." Who? "Who will take us?" James demanded, but she only shook her head, fading from view as the whispers resumed. In a small attic room, they found a journal belonging to the family in the photograph. It described their descent into madness after discovering the house's cursed nature. They had conducted rituals, summoning entities from another realm, hoping to harness their power. But instead, they unleashed horrors beyond their control. The family had vanished, leaving behind nothing but whispers and shadows. As James read the journal, his hands trembled. The last few entries described how the family had been haunted by shadows that whispered secrets of another world. They performed a ritual, hoping to communicate with the spirits, but instead they summoned something far worse. The final entry was brief, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "We've opened the door. They are here." Before James could finish reading, a loud thud echoed through the house. Sarah flinched. The sound was coming from the attic floor beneath them, as if something large was moving below. "Let's get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice laced with fear. As they descended the creaky stairs, the temperature plummeted even further. The once faint whispers were now angry, their words more distinct, filled with venom. The shadows in the house seemed to thicken, swallowing the light. Out of nowhere, the dark figure from earlier appeared at the end of the hallway, its hollow eyes glowing brighter than before. Behind it, more figures began to materialize, shadowy, twisted forms with no faces, only jagged mouths hanging open in silent screams. "They're coming!" Sarah screamed, grabbing James's arm as they bolted through the house, the shadows following close behind. Their movements were erratic, distorted, as if reality itself was bending around them. The couple burst into a small room on the ground floor and slammed the door shut behind them. James jammed a chair under the handle, his heart pounding in his chest. For a brief moment, the house fell silent. Breathing heavily, Sarah glanced around the room. It was an old study, lined with shelves of ancient, dusty books. At the center of the room stood an ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of grime. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to come from the mirror itself. "That book. The one we found earlier," James said, panting. "It mentioned something about a mirror." James wiped away the dust on the mirror, revealing strange symbols etched around the frame. As they stared into the reflection, they realized the shadows in the room weren't moving like their own. Instead, they saw the faint outline of something else, something trapped within the glass. The whispers grew louder, and then, in the mirror's reflection, a face appeared, a twisted, malevolent face with burning eyes. It wasn't human. "The mirror," Sarah said in a hushed voice. "It's holding something." James nodded, his voice trembling. "It's not just spirits. There's something worse, something they summoned." The air around them grew thick and suffocating. The face in the mirror shifted, grinning with malice. A voice, low and guttural, filled the room. "I've waited so long." James's heart raced as he realized what they were dealing with. The jinn, a malevolent entity from another world, had been summoned and bound to the house, unable to escape unless it claimed the souls of those who entered. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the shadowy figures outside the room began pounding on the door, trying to break in. The jinn's voice grew louder, more insistent. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. We have to destroy the mirror," James said, his voice shaking with determination. "It's the only way to stop this." Sarah's eyes widened in terror. "But how? The mirror looks ancient. What if it unleashes something even worse?" Before they could decide, the door behind them splintered, and the shadow figures began pouring into the room, their jagged mouths opening wider as they reached for the couple. Without another word, James grabbed a heavy iron rod from a nearby shelf and swung it at the mirror. The first strike sent a crack running across the glass, and the jinn let out an ear-piercing scream that shook the entire house. The figures recoiled as the mirror cracked, their forms flickering as though their connection to this world was weakening. But the djinn wasn't defeated yet. Its twisted face grew larger in the reflection, filled with rage. James swung again, this time with all his strength. The mirror shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the room. The djinn's scream intensified, a guttural roar of pain and fury, and the house itself began to shake violently, as though it were collapsing in on itself. The walls around them groaned and crumbled. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, and the shadows writhed in agony, their forms dissipating into smoke. The ground beneath them shook, and it became clear that the house was coming down. "Run!" James shouted, pulling Sarah toward the door. They stumbled through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling beams and debris as they made their way toward the exit. Behind them, the djinn's presence lingered, its voice faint but filled with malice. "You can't escape. I'll find you." Bursting through the front door, Sarah and James barely made it out before the house collapsed entirely, sinking into the ground as though it had never been there. The forest around them fell eerily silent. For a moment they stood there, panting, staring at the empty clearing where the house once stood. The oppressive darkness that had surrounded them lifted, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest. The whispers were gone, but something still didn't feel right. As they made their way back through the woods, Sarah felt a strange burning sensation on her arm. She rolled up her sleeve to reveal a set of faint symbols etched into her skin, the same symbols they had seen in the book and on the mirror. "What is this?" she gasped, panic rising in her chest. James's face turned pale. "I don't know, but I think it's not over." As they reached their car and drove away, James glanced in the rearview mirror. At first, it was just the forest behind them, but then, for a split second, he saw it, the twisted face of the djinn staring back at him, grinning wickedly from the back seat. The camera zooms in on James's terrified expression, and the screen cuts to black. The final sound is the sinister, low laughter of the djinn, leaving the audience with the chilling sense that the horror is far from over.